Welcome to the Sonic Collective, a music podcast that explores a different album or musical concept each month, diving deep into its history, context, and impact on the music industry. Join our host, Alain, Scott, and Darren Scott, that's way too many Scotts, as they share their thoughts, insights, and personal connections to the music, inviting you, the listener, to discover new perspectives and appreciation for some of the greatest albums and music of all time.
Hey everyone, it's Alain here for the Sonic Collective, and this is the third installment of our continuing series of This Influenced That. This month I chose to explore whether or not we thought the Deftones had any influence over relative newcomers in the alternative metal scene, Sleep Token. Let's just jump into it. I'm going to throw it over to Scott Coates first.
Thanks, Alan. You know, I had heard of the Deftones, but clearly didn't know what they were, because for some reason I thought they were sort of a swing type band that might have had a song in the Swingers soundtrack. So completely eluded me and was surprised when I heard them. And Sleep Token, never heard of them either. So pretty pumped to get into two brand new bands. And boy, was I, again, surprised when I turned on the Deftones. Back to school, at first I thought, okay, this isn't what I thought, but okay, this kind of has a Tool, Nirvana, 311 kind of feel. And then the second song, Digital Bath, comes on, and it's screaming emotion, a song with rhythm, and I'm not sure what's happening. And then Elite pops on, and we're into death metal territory almost with that growly singing and that. And I gotta say, I don't like growly singing. And of course, you hear that kind of sound in Korea, Higher, and Gods as well. And then you hit RX Queen, and you're back to something along the lines of like Digital Bath, right? It just switches gears again. And, you know, as then I got into the Sleep Token, I could hear these influences on stuff like Dark Signs and Sugar and Teenagers. So, you know, that album perplexed me. I listened to it a couple times, and I'm trying to find some continuity as I'm listening to the Deftones. Like, do I listen to this when I jog, or I'm cleaning, or what? And I couldn't get into any groove of it because it just shifts gears so much. And it got me thinking a bit about the Bad Brains in the way that was a punk album a couple picks ago. And then they're doing reggae, which they were both good. But I'm like, hang on here. Like, is this a punk band or is this a reggae band? And I sort of found myself thinking back to that because I found this shifted styles and gears so much. So then I got to the Sleep Token. Again, never heard them. And their first song, The Night Does Not Belong to God. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm into a slow, atmospheric kind of album and band here. This is going to be interesting. And then The Offering comes on, and boom. I mean, again, it just completely shifts gears. I don't listen to Evanescence, but it kind of reminded me of them. And then, you know, Levitate comes on, and we're back to, like, emotional. I imagine, a guy standing in the rain, kind of something almost Imagine Dragons could do. And then you hit Dark Signs, and it's almost like an English kind of semi-electronic band, as was Sugar. And then, you know, Higher and Gods, Take Aim. I mean, Higher and Gods, you get into that death metal territory. And then Take Aim and Give, they're soft again. So I feel like you're talking, with each of these bands, you're talking about a band that could be two or three different bands, or put out two or three different albums with the band. And I like variance in bands and music. But I've got to say, like, I just couldn't get into either of them because, again, they just didn't flow to me, and I never knew what was coming next or how I should feel, or I'd kind of get in a bit of a pace, and then it would slow down. And so it was all over the board, but I can definitely hear, you know, there's that long rumbling, I don't know how to describe it, almost like an engine on a car going that just keeps going car sound, and an angst in it that echoes through both albums. So I could definitely hear that in Sleep Token from Deftones. Also, I mean, those emotionally torn vocals, right? Whether it was a slow one or a fast one, they're angry and hard at times, but there's like real emotional kind of tearing in the back and a real emotional space. Again, that variance between emotional, slow, and electronic overtones and death metal screaming. So the oscillation was something that was really obvious in both albums, almost like one copied the other. Now, they don't sound like copies. Like, it's not like Greta Van Fleet sounds so much like Led Zeppelin. I don't think you'd listen to Sleep Token and immediately go, oh, they ripped off Deftones. But I think when you approach it as we have in this exercise, I definitely heard the similarities, and I got introduced to two bands I'd never listened to. Now I got to say, again, I don't think either of them jived with me because it just shifted gears so much. I'm not into the death metal growling type tracks. The other ones were interesting. Probably for both of them, I err on liking the kind of slower tunes they did. Those were to me a bit more appealing. So there was a bit of a rambling review, but I definitely see the connections. Back to you, Alan.
Thanks. Yeah, very interesting. I kind of thought about that too, how just that juxtaposition from song to song and track to track really, like maybe the Deftones doing that first might have inspired Sleep Token. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to throw it over to Scott Gregory, whose name is White Pony Boy. Stay golden.
That's right. Shout out to The Outsiders, one of the greatest movies ever. I'm with Scott in that I'd never heard of Sleep Token before. I'd listened to a bit of Deftones, like Be Quiet and Drive is obviously probably the one that everyone has heard, if they've heard one, maybe. I don't know, I'm not enough of a Deftones fan to know if there's an even more commercial one out there. But, I was just never into the screamy new metal. I was never into Korn, anything that was just really just out there on that metal side of things. But this album, White Pony, is heavy on guitar. There is some synth layered in. It's still got mostly that rocker vibe to it. It's the screamy side of Chino's kind of voice there that gets to me sometimes. I'm with Scott in that I kind of divided the tracks into what I called the heavier and softer tracks, like heavier being Elite, Back to School, softer tracks being Digital Bath, Teenager, and then Knife Party in between them. And I found as we moved into the softer side of the album, it was really more up my alley. And that came to full fruition when we get to Passenger and Maynard James Keenan, one of the greatest vocalists of all time, suddenly takes the wheel and drives. And I thought that song was amazing. And I don't know if he had some influence over the instruments behind it as well, too. But it sounded exactly like a Tool or a Perfect Circle song. And then when I went back and listened to the rest of the album, trying to imagine it, then, I noticed, okay, well, a lot of these songs could wind up being potentially on a Tool or Perfect Circle album as well, too. And I had a bit more of an appreciation for it. Same thing with Scott Weiland, who I also think is another one of the greatest vocalists of our time, was on RX Queen. And so, after a couple listens through and some letting it evolve in my mind, it grew on me a bit. The screamy parts still don't speak to me very much, but, I guess that's a takeaway, is that when Deftones sound like Tool, then I'm a fan. As far as Sleep Token goes, it's atmospheric. Scott had already said that. It bleeds into heavier metal compositions, particularly just these really oppressive guitars. I felt it got a little repetitive at times. Things like The Offering, Levitate, and Dark Signs, they seem to be very structurally similar. Maybe I'm just not giving it as nuanced an ear as it should. But, it just starts out really soft, and it builds, and then big angry guitars, and then crescendo, and then it drops off, right? And individually, I don't think that's an issue for any given single, but when you got a whole album full of that, it could get a bit monotonous. And maybe that's because we listened to this a whole bunch in a row over, a condensed month's listening. Maybe if I was just coming back to this album, every couple weeks or every couple months, it wouldn't be as much an issue, and definitely not an issue if I'm just pulling singles and putting it into my playlist rotations, right? But, the heavier tracks like Gods and Higher and that, not really my thing. That's back on the screaming side of things. Sugar, okay, it's in between, but, if I had to listen to Sugar by Sleep Token or Sugar by Tori Amos, I'm going to pick Tori Amos. But the lighter side of this, like Drag Me Under, Give, Take Aim, all very solid tracks. And you can see when you get onto the lighter side of the two bands, I think is when the comparisons really become very strong between them, because I don't think Sleep Token goes really into that louder, screamier side of things. Even when they're getting more aggressive, his vocals still aren't, as shouty, which is great because I'm just not a screamy, shouty kind of metal guy. But the artistic range, Scott had mentioned that, I agree. they just go in different directions, and I dig that. I like that they take those chances and that they're pushing themselves musically. Sleep Token pushes themselves even in how they present themselves in the media and everything with their concealed identities and whatnot. So just a very carefully crafted artistic experience from them. I like how they do blend metal with that electronic atmospheric side of things. And honestly, if you brought Chino over to Sleep Token, I think he could front that band, just as easily as he could Deftones and anything, right? Like, and I think that's a tribute to just how much influence, how much artistically these two bands share. And it's hard to believe that there's actually 20 years between these albums. Sundowning does have a lot of throwback vibe to it in my eyes. And I think that becomes more clear where I'd gone back and listened to the Deftones' second album, Around the Fur. And when you look at the distance that Deftones came from Around the Fur, which was a lot more of a traditional, and I feel old now, new metal kind of sound. And then when they layer in the electronics and the synth side of things, I think that's when you can really see the contrast, because all of the ways that they evolved between Around the Fur and White Pony seems to be the majority of the elements that you see in Sundowning and the influence that are put upon them. So overall, again, I think this trip would probably have me going to Sleep Token for tracks more than Deftones. But I really enjoyed the listen through. Deftones has always been on my list to actually give a full reasoned listen to, and this was that opportunity. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I can jump in here. It's Darren. Yeah, good input by both Scots there, and I share definitely a lot of the same feeling. I don't know if anybody's even said the term new metal yet, but this is the kind of category that both these bands get put in. But that's pretty broad, and probably the reason it's broad is because of bands like this. New metal gets a bad rap, as we know, rap being a good pun, because a lot of times there's rap in there that doesn't necessarily work. But I think both these bands are good. Same as, I guess Scott Gregory, I was a little more familiar with the Deftones. I did not know the Sleep Token at all. The Sleep Token, not the Sleep Token, just Sleep Token. But the Deftones, I do remember kind of some of their big hits, and I do remember Digital Bath kind of back in the day and finding that catchy. But I actually reached out to Alain during the month and just said, man, I forgot how much of a banger and how good of a song that actually is. I really liked Digital Bath. I think that song just builds interestingly. In a way, it doesn't just kind of like slowly build and then have a big bang. It just kind of keeps going the whole way right to the end, and then it just ends. But it's really interesting kind of way they organize that song. So definitely one of my favorites from the Deftones, and it was cool to go back and listen to it. But honestly, I obviously had not listened to White Pony in its entirety, and not knowing Sleep Token, Sundowning was completely foreign to me. Both interesting, for sure. The vocals are definitely the star. Sleep Token, as Scott Gregory mentioned, they are a band that hides their identity. Basically, the lead vocalist goes by the term Vessel, or the Vessel, and their whole thing is basically they're disciples or vessels probably of the god Sleep, what they call. And all the songs are about this relationship. I shouldn't say it. They're not all about this relationship with the god Sleep, but a lot of them are about relationships or about this god of sleep. It's pretty interesting. I listened to another podcast talking about Sleep Token, and they said that, swap out when you think they're talking about the god Sleep to just put in Jesus or Satan, and it completely changes it. He's like, if they put Satan in, this band would be way more hardcore. Or if they put in Jesus, it would be borderline, basically a kind of a heavy metal Christian band. But, because they use this, I don't even know what you call it, their performance or, art, that they all dress up. They wear these black cloaks. They have these white masks that have these runes on them that people are constantly trying to figure out. Nobody knows their identity. It would be interesting to know their identity, just in the fact that going back to the Deftones, I mean, Chino, the lead singer, Chino Marino, was really the driving force. And, the creative guy, he was the writer. And I really think that shows. He wrote it for himself. I think his vocals are amazing. Both these vocalists are amazing. And Scott Gregory said that Chino could easily swap in. I couldn't agree more. The control that the vocalist for Sleep Token has is amazing. Like they do this whisper thing, but a lot of times that's hard to come off. And his low register and his control of tone, pitch, his style, and the way he can control his voice is like really, really impressive. Like, even though I gotta admit, I did like some Sleep Token songs. Some were just a little out there for me. This style on both fronts isn't really my wheelhouse, I would say, but I loved a lot of the individual songs. And that same podcast was mentioning that a lot of metal bands will start and they'll start like really heavy, release all these heavy songs, get known for, earn their street cred with the metal scene. And then of course comes like the Metallica Black Album, where then it gets a little more mellow and everything changes. And then they get introduced to maybe the more mainstream by going that way. Whereas it's almost the opposite for someone like a Sleep Token, where they came in really kind of quiet and mellow, and then they kind of spring these heavier metal songs on you a little bit, or kind of weave those elements through those songs. I found, I guess, musician-wise, Sleep Token to me didn't blow my mind. Like, there wasn't any big, catchy guitar riffs or anything like that. It was more in the organization of how they played their instruments and weaved in, I guess, this metal and other genres more so than their skill, if that makes sense, outside of the vocalist. Because, again, I think, and I'd like to believe that, vocalist is the driving force in the band and perhaps the writer and everything, but I don't know. But I really found that. And for both, same as the Deftones, like just that vocal range is so crazy. And the Deftones, they started back in 1988, and really this Sleep Token album is just, and usually we have don't go earlier than 5 years, but this is a special episode. But I think it was 2019. We're right on 5 years old for this. Really, I think Sleep Token had an EP, but this was their first album. But yeah, the difference in, years, 20 years, but at the same time, I felt they were very contemporary of each other. So I definitely saw the relationship. One thing, this other podcast, I'll credit it in the notes when you put it up, Alain. I forget it now. Should have wrote that down. But anyway, he also said that he feels like the new, Gen Z or whatever that are getting into this. And apparently the Deftones are actually starting to chart again. They're starting to become popular again because there's this new kind of new metal sound that's really vibing with the younger crowd. And this guy on this podcast says he thinks it's because if you think of how really the vocalists work and everything, and even the subject matter of the songs, they're writing a lot about love, relationships, even sex, passion, and it's things. It's really where if you think like, oh my God, like I'm like an 80s kid and I'm embarrassed to say the hair metal, like there was zero depth to that. And it was like, very misogynistic, belittling women and stuff like that. But hey, it's just like fun metal, or there wasn't really a lot of depth in a lot of the lyrics. Like obviously some of the greats are in there and have great songs back in the 70s and 80s and the beginning of metal, but we understand that transition. But this is really a lot more poppy in a way. Like if you even think, a lot of the, Taylor Swift or something, of course they're about relationships and breaks up and stuff like that. So, this is like the Taylor Swift of new metal, if it makes sense. And I said, like, especially with Sleep Tokens, it was kind of some mellow stuff. And then it got into the song Gods. And then that was like, like metalcore, or like Scott Coates says, that very kind of screamy metal. I always compare it to Alexis on Fire, great Canadian band that was kind of probably one of the pioneers in that form of vocalization, and an amazing Canadian band, but still not my favorite, just not my style, but I love a lot of Alexis on Fire songs. Anyway, long story short, the next song popped up and it was Sugar by Sleep Token, and that to me, that was like, I think I could hear Nickelback singing that. Like, it was just like that, a a lot more pop structure and just, you know, a little more mellow, but like, it was just like, so they kind of jump all over the place. And Alan said it in his introduction, but both these bands, they kind of, you know, push that, like, how do you define them? Yes, it's kind of under a new metal bucket, but it's really tough. And I think that's good. I mean, I think either way, I think both these bands came out and one influenced by the other, but they're pushing the boundaries of this genre or creating a new one. And I really respect that. So even though not totally in my wheelhouse, but I actually really enjoyed both albums a lot. So great picks. Alan, I think it's time I shut up. Why don't I push it back to you? So how did you come around this, and what do you think?
Thanks, Darren. I'm never going to forget you quoting Sleep Token is the Taylor Swift of nu metal. Because that's pretty apt, I think.
That's funny. That just came to me. I did not write that down, but I was trying to think of a comparison in my head real quick. But yeah.
But I think it's apt, right? Because I'm a bit younger than the rest of you guys, so just a little bit closer to Gen Z in terms of age, and I see it. I see this resurgence in the nu metal genre, which I'm here for. So it's cool to see it kind of come full circle. I would probably, like, personally, I wouldn't define either of these bands as nu metal. I think alternative metal is probably, if we had to fit them in a box, alternative metal is the box. I would try and squeeze them in just because of how they approach their music very artistically and progressively. It's almost like prog metal. Scott Gregory mentioned Tool a lot, and Tool's a very prog metal band. And interestingly, like, the metal genre is full of gatekeepers, and for whatever reason, the Deftones and Sleep Token and Tool are all highly respected, regardless of what a lot of gatekeepers say. They just have a broad appeal. So I think that's interesting. More to the topic at hand, the Deftones were one of my favorite bands back when I was in high school. But I struggled to really appreciate White Pony for what it was initially at the time, having kind of preferred Around the Fur, which was their previous album, and one of my Desert Island picks. And Scott, you briefly touched on that album. In the last 24 years, though, White Pony has definitely grown on me a lot. And as I listened through it this month, I really focused on the drumming more so than I ever did before. I never really fully appreciated Abe Cunningham's contribution to the overall sound of the band before. And maybe that's because back in high school, I couldn't really afford any good speakers or headphones. I don't know. But anyway, he brings a lot of soul to the music that I definitely noticed this time around. I also really appreciated White Pony's sort of spatiality. There's a spaciness to it. They're employing a lot of reverb and delay. You can tell that they spread the audio wide across the stereo band, panning things far to the left, far to the right. Just makes it feel really full. And anytime I hear that in an album, I always feel like it's almost futuristic. I don't know, that's just a weird thing I do, but I love that sound. For me anyway, the top tracks on this album are, and I guess have always been, Passenger, featuring Maynard James Keenan from Tool. I love Tool. Digital Bath, I think that's what a great song. That one, it's hard to pick a favorite, but I think it's between Passenger and Digital Bath, and it'll change on the day. Back to School is a good old-fashioned hard rock, fast-paced song, which I can appreciate. And RX Clean, I think maybe Scott Coates, you mentioned it had a similar vibe to Digital Bath, and I have to agree there. I just really liked all of those. Honestly, the whole album is good, though. I didn't find any track kind of left me longing for the skip button or anything. Overall, it's just a heavy, angsty, and sometimes weird and meandering, surprising album. The band is obviously very talented at what they do. I really enjoyed going back and exploring White Pony after all these years. But let's talk about Sleep Token. Obviously, we mentioned Sundowning was their first album, and it's also very kind of meandering and takes you on this strange journey. Yeah, their lyrics, like, I never thought about it before, but it is kind of like Taylor Swift, right? Like, the lyrical content is often about love and loss. And Darren, you mentioned like you could swap out sleep for like God or Satan, and it kind of changes the tone. But I never honestly looked at their lyrics as speaking to a deity. To me, they were just always love songs written about a woman. I don't know. Maybe sleep is a woman. But yeah, anyway, I've been a fan of Sleep Token to a small extent. Like, I've heard a bunch of their songs and I've liked most of them, but I've never actually deliberately sat down and listened to an album in full and like tried to take it in. So this was quite a journey for me. Yeah, man, they're hard to define, right? Like, you go from track to track and it all sounds different. And I think the way I think they were really deliberate in their track listings, because it's staggered. Like, it wasn't just a crescendo from soft to hard as the album goes from start to finish. It's kind of like soft, hard, fast, slow, fast, slow. They stagger it maybe to keep the audience from getting bored. I don't know. But yeah, man, it's just super weird. Like, the song Gods, it sounds exactly like Chino Moreno on vocals. It sounds like it could have been a Deftones song. And then, you know, you got a track like Take Aim, and it's almost a folksy rock jam, like the kind of music you'd find in a movie trailer for a romance, like a rom-com. I don't know. Anyway, standout tracks on this album for me are Dark Signs, which is my absolute favorite song from the band of all the songs I've ever heard them do. Sugar, which is a weird sort of saccharine, pun intended, almost like a lullaby that turns into a metal song. That's the one Darren said might have been a Nickelback song in another life. And The Offering, to me, that song plays like a prog rock anthemic song like you might find on a Tool album, or even, dare I say, a Pink Floyd album. I don't know. And that's why it was really tough for me, after having listened to both albums back to back a few times, to actually I don't know if I can find a direct link between these two albums. Like, I'm not so sure now. I think there was probably some influence, but Sleep Token approaches their music in such a broad way that it wouldn't surprise me if they were equally inspired by Celine Dion or Taylor Swift. And I know they do like to do a lot of pop song covers. Like, I think their first big viral hit was a Hey Ya cover, like a slow acoustic version. So I think actually Sleep Token has a lot of influences, and maybe the Deftones are one of them. But yeah, I think anytime you get bands that can kind of dance the dance of dynamic range the way these guys can, you're probably not going to find a short list of inspiration. You're going to find a big list of things that might even surprise you. The only thing I think maybe I could draw a more definitive line to as a link between the two bands would be the drumming style. As I mentioned before, Abe Cunningham kind of keeping time for the Deftones. When I really listened and focused on his style, I could hear it a little bit in the way the Sleep Token drummer, who is called Number 2, how he approaches his songs. Seriously, like, he is a god tier drummer. I am so blown away. Like, I'm gonna go back and listen to it and just like heavily focus on the drums, because he's doing stuff that that you wouldn't think a human could do. And at one point I did think that maybe a lot of it was programmed, but then I found a video of Number 2 playing the drums to, I think it was Dark Signs, and they showed him actually playing and like using trigger pads and stuff like that, and it's a human being playing these highly technical beats. So that earned them a lot of brownie points for me. So yeah, this was a fun experience, I think, this month. Just kind of, for me, revisiting an album I used to really crush back in the day, and then getting better acquainted with Sleep Token, who, you know, I think I can call myself a fan of. So Yeah, definitely a fun one. And I'm glad to hear you guys kind of at least enjoyed the experience of listening to these two albums. And I know I figured Scott Coates especially, like, it's not necessarily your wheelhouse, the heavier stuff. So I'm glad you didn't completely hate your hate your month.
No, not at all. It was interesting. And yeah, the biggest problem was just what I was going to get next. I just can't figure out when I'd listen to it. It's probably more grab a couple singles here. But thanks for the pick. What a fun journey.
Totally. And I think that's a totally valid way to appreciate music too. Sometimes you don't like a full album, but 2 or 3 songs speak to you. And that's why God gave us playlists. Anyway, I think that's a wrap for this episode. Up next, we have Scott Gregory rounding out our This Album Influenced That Album series. Scott, do you want to maybe speak to that, or is it going to be a surprise?
No, I can. I think I'm about 95% certain who I'm picking. It's actually Def Leppard and Stone Temple Pilots, but not in the direction that you think. So it's actually Stone Temple Pilots, 1994 Purple, influencing Def Leppard's 1996 Slang. So throwing it a little bit on its ear, a band Def Leppard trying to navigate new waters with different musical taste changes, trying to fit itself into more of a grungy rock type scene, and latching on to someone that's getting it done and maybe stealing a little of their smoke. So
Cool.
interested to hear what you all think of that.
Yeah, that's. I've never listened to that Def Leppard album for sure. I don't think so. Like, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of lost in the middle there.
Yeah, cool to go. Cool to go the other way. And also, guys, so Scott, you're finishing up this round. There's 4 members here. We do, so 1 pick each. So we rotate every 4 months. But after Scott, actually, that puts us into the beginning of October. The pick will come back to me. And that will also be the last pick that will make us reach 10 years at this podcast. So, well, it did start as a blog and then turned to a podcast, but same, but different. But basically 10 years of us doing album reviews and influential albums and special episodes. So, we'll talk about it in the next little while here. We got this month to think about it, but I think we got to wrap up with probably a 4-month special of, looking back how we'll do that and, how we'll, figure out those episodes. But that's pretty cool, guys. And we do it for ourselves and enjoy it every month that we do it. But yeah, 10 years, that's a big deal. I know, Scott Coates, you've had a podcast going for quite a while as well, Talk Travel Asia over there, that it's just wrapped up as well, right?
Yeah, indeed. I can't believe it's been 10 years for this one. Thanks for sticking along for the journey. It's given some fun listens every month. I wouldn't have guessed it was 10 years. Damn. And we're going to have to finally meet one day, right? I've still never met Alain or Scott G. That's kind of something. So,
but you're here in 2 weeks. So
yeah.
You're here in 2 weeks. So yeah.
We'll make
that happen. We have to.
We have to raise.
I think if anything, maybe one of those episodes is that we'll all have to get together and maybe just record it over some drinks and
could do.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
Everyone drops shrooms when we record.
Anyway, good picks, Alain. I love it. I love it when we push the boundaries, especially, again, it's good to experiment with new music, and that's how you learn. So thanks a lot. Great picks. Really interesting.
Sweet.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next month with Scott Gregory's pick.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Sonic Collective, where we've explored the music, the history, and the impact of some of the greatest albums of all time. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained new insights and appreciation for the music you and we love. Join us next month for another exciting album, and until then, keep listening to great music.